Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Surah An-Nahl, chapter 16, and we will cover verses 1 to 9. There are two aspects which I will cover in some detail: physical signs in the world and man possessing choice plus intent, and what is the relationship between the two. These are the references, and this is our contact in case there is any query or question regarding this presentation or any other presentation. An overview of the presentation. The surah gets its name from the mention of Nahl, which means honey bee, in verse 1668. The outcomes of human deeds take time to materialize, as these depend on the law of requital and the law of respite of Allah. The universe is created for constructive results, which Quran calls itself al-Haq, and this is the way that Mu'mineen should view it and reflect on this fact on a continuous basis. There are enough signs in the physical world and in the creation of man himself, from his conception to mother's womb to his becoming a fully developed adult, where he can reflect on his creation and to come to terms with important aspects of his finite physical life in the world. Man needs to pay attention to the laws functioning at all levels in the outer world as well as in his life as a human being. For example, he should ponder on his dealings with livestock, from whom he draws numerous benefits and also appreciates their possession, appearance, and movement. The aesthetic and appreciative aspects of this. If man pays attention to what is in the Quran, then he will figure out that everything in the world and in his own life follows laws, and that his choices in life lead to the creation of the kind of world he wishes to live in. First verse for today's presentation, 16:1. On this path, no need to be in a hurry. Ata amrullahi fala tastajiluhu subhanahu wa ta'ala amma yushrikun. These opponents demand that the destruction with which you repeatedly frighten us, bring it on quickly. Say to them that regarding this, the command of Allah has already been issued. It will soon manifest itself. Why are you so impatient for its arrival? It is not something bearing good fortune for you which you wish to acquire quickly. You are sitting with this idea in your head that those forces which you declare as being equivalent to Allah will prevent this divine decree. This thought is batil. Allah is far above all of these things. So it's quite interesting if we link this verse with the last verse of previous surah, which is Surah Al-Hijr, 15th, chapter 15, then we can see the link between the two. Because over there, these opponents of Jamaat-e Mu'mineen were insisting that if you think that punishment will descend on us, why don't you bring it quickly? Continuing from Surah Al-Hijr, the law of requital functions 24/7. This is part of developing our potential to overcome the temptation to quicken things up in our life on the path of Allah. Events need time to ripen. So there is an instruction for us as well, those who are students of the Quran, that on this path, there is no need to become impatient. And we have gone through this aspect previously as well, because impatience, any display of impatience by us, any students of the Quran, means that their self needs more time to develop. So they need to make more efforts to understand these things. The Quran all along guides us on this aspect, that quick results are not going to come in your direction on this path, as this path needs people to firstly understand their own psyche, secondly to understand what change the Quran is inviting us to bring into this psyche to replace its previous content, and thirdly to develop their self based on this newly acquired psyche within the values of the Quran. So it is important for us to understand that wherever we make a start to come towards the Quran, we come with a certain psychological makeup, and that psyche has to change. And human beings don't change their belief systems overnight. They take many years before they come to grips with the psyche, which the Quran is asking us to grow or develop. Having experienced this change to some extent, wait till the need and desire becomes created within us to join together with those who are already on this path. And that helps, because through exchange of views, through discussion, doing brainstorming, people come to this realization that they are not alone on this path. others are also facing the same challenges. Then keep remaining on this path firmly and patiently, as results may or may not appear within our lifetime. This is part of the self-development process. The formula being pursued will only produce results if it is followed in its pristine, defined form, and no contamination is allowed in this formula. If it gets polluted, then no results will emerge on this path of Deen. Hence, continuous reminding is a prerequisite on this path, and this can only be pursued in the company of Mu'mineen. Second verse, 16:2, Wahi of Allah comes from outside and is not a product of the human thought. يُنَزِّلُ الْمَلَائِكَةَ بِالرُّوحِ مِنْ أَمْرِهِ عَلَى مَنْ يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ أَنْ أَنْذِرُوا أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنَا فَاتَّقُونَ. According to his law of Mashiach, he sends Wahi via the Malaika down on one among his servants whom he considers suitable, so that through this Wahi, people are made aware that authority and rule in the universe is only that of Allah. Hence, you should only observe his laws, and that is to become muttaqi. Expanding this verse, 16:2, Wahi of Allah provides guidance, which is a need for man to live life at self's level. The sending of Wahi and its mode and form of delivery is a mystery for the ordinary human mind, which he wishes to solve. There are a number of verses on this aspect in the Quran. This was also a more pertinent issue at the time when Wahi used to be revealed to the messengers who were living life like ordinary people. And it used to surprise people that this human being living among them has suddenly come up with something different, something of different thought process and the lines on which they were used to thinking. And here he comes and tells them that their path is wrong. And this used to surprise them. And obviously they are going to question this new message which was communicated to them. Here the Quran has answered one aspect of the communication of this Wahi, i.e. through the medium of Malaika. They convey the message, i.e. Allah's Amr as directed, and this medium of communication is beyond the remit of human beings because it is invisible. Being invisible, we cannot see it. Even the thoughts, for example, which come to somebody's mind, we don't know about them. We only are aware of our own thoughts, and our own thoughts are not visible to us. So these are the kind of issues which even arise in our mind as of today. We need to tackle with it. The issue is that the Quran is there. It has the guidance. Quran has proved its authenticity before us, and we know that it contains permanent values. We also know that the human beings do not think like the Quran, and as a result, we need an external guidance because we do not have internal guidance. And a number of points we have covered before as well. So these are kind of issues which we have to resolve, think, convince ourselves, and then move on. The issue before us is not who and how the message was revealed to the messengers. Instead, we need to concentrate on comprehension of the message itself. And that is important, that we got a finite life, death is awaiting us. And before that, we have to create a new self and then solve human problems by coming together. And those are more important issues. And gradually, some of the thoughts which come to our mind, those do get resolved regarding the Quran. But something we might have to leave it for the hereafter as well. However, in this regard, the Quran asks us to come to terms with a few important issues of life. First, since we possess the traits of choice and intent, we need some form of guidance. As there is no internal guidance within us, as is the case with animals, we need external guidance to serve as an objective standard, i.e., which is free from human biases and prejudices. And that is the nutshell, that is the crux of this issue. Because if we are happy with our biases and prejudices, then essentially we will not benefit from the Quran. Quran asks us to think beyond or above the level of our biases and prejudices and deal with them. Without this guidance, man-made systems will not allow our latent potentials to become manifested, and we will live life at an animalistic level. Continuing, second, there is enough in the physical world around us and also within us as physical and thinking beings, which should prompt us to look for meanings to our existence and our life. Finding a meaning in life will only become defined when we know the meaning of our existence at a fundamental level. There are two aspects here in terms of finding a meaning. One is meaning of our existence, and second is finding a meaning within the way we are living our life. And both are important issues, because if without the guidance of the Quran, we will find a different meaning of our life when we are going through this life. Whereas the Quran directs us to a higher meaning of life, in which concept of Allah, the life of the hereafter, are intrinsic parts. Third, as and when the guidance of the Quran comes before us, whether by chance or through our own efforts, pay attention to it, as understanding it will not only help us, but will also help those with whom we come in contact. This is why the Quran has repeatedly emphasized to warn others. Giving warning draws the attention of others, as well as increasing our own courage and conviction in the guidance of Allah. Fourth, through this process, we learn a lot about our own self as well as that of others. Becoming muttaqi includes every aspect of the human psyche, whether based on personal reflection or on solid deeds, or both. Identifying opportunities in our life to enhance our state of taqwa is part of this self-development process. And taqwa, we know, is that quality developing within us, that understanding, that level of development of the self where it avoids the pitfalls of life and keeps progressing forward and developing itself. There is no ilah other than Allah, i.e., only the immutable laws of Allah are functioning in the world. And Allah means whose laws should be accepted, whose obedience should be accepted. All laws made by human beings have an inbuilt expiry, and they keep becoming redundant after the damage they cause to the human world. Next verse 16:3, the universe including the earth are created as haqq. خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ بِالْحَقِّ تَعَالَى عَمَّا يُشْرِكُونَ. He has created the highs and lows of the universe as a reality, and it is not a dream, illusion, mirage, play or sport, deception, or some kind of vague, ill-informed idea. And these kind of thoughts we see floating around in the world, those who do not understand the higher purpose of human creation. In order to establish constructive results, and its full control is in his hand. Those powers about which people think that these are partners in the functioning of Allah, Allah is far above these things. He is not dependent on anyone for his rule. Further reflections on this verse. This aspect needs to become part of our understanding that the universe is created as haqq. Hence, the creation of each one of us has a lofty purpose. If we do not figure this out in detail from the Quran, then essentially we will fail to appreciate our own self and its creation. Entering into the next phase of the life of the self without knowing about it is not a very wise step. Here the Quran has drawn our attention to an important aspect of our life after informing us that the universe is created to produce constructive outcomes. However, for these constructive outcomes to manifest, we, the possessors of choice and intent, need to come to terms with our psyche and the powers available to us in the world in which we are born and living. Where we are, we can figure this out through our efforts. While where we ought to be, this can be extracted from Quranic study of the system of Deen. Because we are living in a man-made system, and in a man-made system, it is easier to figure out where we are. But what shape this man-made system should take in view of the problems it is creating, that is something which the Quran tells us, that is, i.e., the alternative system to man-made systems. This also means that we question religious rituals, whether these produce any constructive results or not. And I put a question mark over there because this is an ongoing process, that we have to look at the world in which we are living and then see that the people who are involved in the religious aspects of belief system, can they bring a change while holding on to that belief system? Because whole issue is of change in human psyche. And if people are quite happy with the psyche they possess, will they make an effort to acquire a different psyche if they are fully satisfied with the psyche they have? And that is the those are the kind of questions which should arise in our mind, and we should try to find an answer for them from the Quran. This deen, which is haq, needs a certain kind of psyche in order to draw benefit from its value system. This psyche is meant to be acquired through the guidance of the Quran, and it must be free from any external or internal contamination, and it has to be able to recognize this developed state of the self itself. There is no point in saying that I have developed myself and not knowing fully that how did I develop it, what exactly development means, and where do I stand in terms of solving the human problems. So these are the kind of things which we have to do we have to come to terms through our inner reflection. Without this newly acquired psyche, it simply cannot have the ability to establish the system of deen. Let's go to the next verse. 16:4, signs in the conception and creation of man need for profound reflection. خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِن نُطْفَةٍ فَإِذَا هُوَ خَصِيمٌ مُبِينٌ. A very short verse, and there is a whole word implicit in this verse. Just ponder on different aspects of the universe. Firstly, just take man himself, who keeps bounding forward in opposing the law of Allah. His birth was through a sperm drop which was carrying within it such a big world of latent potentials. Just think that if here, instead of the constructive law of Rububiyat, destructive forces had been in operation, then could this sperm drop have, in way possible, acquired the configuration of a human being? And this is very interesting. We should look at it that we all started from two cells coming together. And I've tried to throw some light in next slide. Do we reflect deeply enough to appreciate our journey from initial conception to our death? Let us stretch our imagination a bit further by reflecting on this verse. The latent potential for these thoughts and understanding which I am sharing here were present in those two cells which became fertilized by coming together. I thought to present my own example because then we can relate to each other, because all of us who are sharing this presentation can relate to their own self. Had I not come to the Quran, then all these latent potentials would have remained dormant and would have disappeared forever with my physical death. And that is a very important question which should arise in our mind and say that if we have benefited from the Quran, and if we had not benefited from the Quran and gone through the process of death, what kind of a life we would have had and what kind of a life we would have lived here. Do we wish this to be the case? And do we wish others to suffer the same? So these are the kind of questions which should come to our mind from this verse. Now let us extend it to every child in the world. Each one has this same latent potential kept within him or her, and if this choice is not explained to him or her at some reasonable point in time in their journey through life, before their death, then each one of them will fail to appreciate the significance of their own creation, never mind the loss caused due to absence of a developed self and its impact on the life of the hereafter. And that is, those thoughts within us will create some sense of urgency, and we will have that motivation to do something about it. Do we wish to create a system where opportunity for the manifestation of these latent potentials is created to make informed choice? Next is, the Quran has drawn our attention to the state of man when he remains unguided. That is, he is in a state of huwa khasimun mubin. Despite the fact that he's got so many potentials, because of his ignorance, because of the wrong system around it, because of the wrong environment, he becomes an open disputer. He has to, because that is the way he found the world in which he or she is brought up. Why does he behave like that? Because he fails to recognize his own importance as a possessor of a self and its tremendous potentials. And these potentials are both visible plus latent. Did he make an informed choice to live life without being fully aware of the guidance offered by the Quran? A few more reflections on this verse. Our task as proponents of deen is very challenging. Firstly, we need to have this developed self and then be able to communicate all this to others. Because if I do not understand what development means within my own self, how am I going to convincingly pass on to others with evidence that these are the kind of changes which take place within ourselves? This is how our outlook changes. This is how our vision changes. Here the Quran has only mentioned the aspect of initial conception as a fertilized embryo, but in 23:14, the Quran has pointed to another very important aspect of setting of human consciousness, which is still a big conundrum in the non-Quranic sphere of intellect. This verse is not trying to put down a human being, as seems to be the case in some translations, that since man is created from a sperm drop, that is a biological step, this is somehow his lowly status. Not at all. Because human beings have to be looked at with all the latent potentials they have. So all human beings who haven't come to the Quran, or the message hasn't been passed on to them, and we see them all around the world, we should relate to them. They all have the same latent potentials, and those potentials are not coming out just because they haven't understood the message of the Quran. The Quran has drawn our attention to the fact of possessing latent potentials within that initial configuration with the very high purpose of human creation, and who has to participate in the process of creation as a creator himself. So it's a huge responsibility as well as pleasure kept within human beings, because once we understand the values given by the Quran and the domain in which it wants us to operate, then the freedom which we get, human being can never enjoy that freedom without the Quran. Pointing to his becoming contentious is to invite him to realize that human life is for the lofty purpose of becoming eminent, for which he is given all that which he needs in this world. Being students of the Quran, we need to keep expanding this aspect through inner reflection so that it becomes embedded in our cognition. Let us go to next two verses, 5 and 6. Physical possessions provide pleasure, and this includes cattle and sheep. وَالْأَنْعَامَ خَلَقَهَا لَكُمْ فِيهَا دِفْءٌ وَمَنَافِعُ وَمِنْهَا تَأْكُلُونَ وَلَكُمْ فِيهَا جَمَالٌ حِينَ تُرِيحُونَ وَحِينَ تَسْرَحُونَ. Go forward from here and look at these livestock which he has created for your benefit. And this is the beauty of the Quran, that first it has drawn our attention to our own creation, and then the biological creation around us, which we are making use of as we live our finite life in this world. There is warm clothing in them for you, wool and skin hides. Other than this, many other things of benefit, and among them there are also such animals whose meat you consume. This is the utilitarian aspect of these. The other aspect is the aesthetic or appreciative one. And this is the beauty over here in these two verses, particularly the second one. You see that when you take them out in the morning, in the rising dawn and dew-laden atmosphere into the jungle to graze, or return with them in the evening in the quiet of the rosy sunset in the horizon after grazing, then what delightful feelings of beauty and joy these scenes contain within themselves. Of course, if we are thinking about it. If we are not thinking about it and behaving like animals, I doubt it if we will think of the sunset and the sunrise. Can this possibly be the outcome of any organization and administration which is dependent on destructive forces? The Quran helps to bring out our cognitive potentials. After drawing our attention to the biological and cognitive side of being human, here the Quran invites us to look at other biological creations which owe their creation to the creation of man, i.e., to be utilized by man by organizing his worldly affairs. This needs a very high sense of duty and responsibility. Allah has placed tremendous confidence and trust in man to manage the affairs of this whole planet. And this is something we should reflect very carefully, that the whole planet has been placed at our disposal for a finite time. And what are we doing with this planet? If man did not have these cognitive potentials, then he would have also been roaming around on the face of the earth without clothes, just like cattle, sheep. Just see the addresses of the Quran, lakum, for all of you. There is no exception in this. It says it is for all of you. What has man done? Instead, drawn the differentiation of you and me, because it has failed to appreciate his own eminence, his own loftiness, his own latent potentials, and got into the base desires. With this kind of differentiation, all those latent potentials related to all of you can never become manifested. By not coming to terms with this kind of thinking, man is doing great harm to his own self-development on which his eternal life depends. It is interesting that most people never even think for a moment about the importance of the utility value of these animals in making human life sustainable on the planet. Our feelings of joy and pleasure need to be acknowledged. Continuing on these two verses, in the second verse, the Quran has pointed to the aesthetic side of human feelings when watching these animals, for example, their appearance, movements toward pastures and fields, the expected benefits in terms of milk, meat, wool, skin, hides, etc. These also provide company to farmers across the world. And the importance of animals and livestock, we should ask a farmer. Those of us who have come from some rural background can appreciate that. Farmers may have a greater sense of appreciation about what is noted here. People who have an affinity for farms and outdoor life feel closer to nature, and ordinary people also visit safari parks with their children to appreciate these animals. This is an essential part of recreation and entertainment in many lands throughout the world. So the important is that we should relate to our own creation and also become more aware of our finitude and the limited time we have in this world and how to utilize all these things for our self-growth and development and to solve human problems. However, here the Quran has drawn our attention to the wider issue of appreciating through the creation of aesthetic feelings which are kept within us, the employment of which is an essential part of developing ourselves. So the Quran is drawing our attention that don't do things without looking at the aesthetic side of your life as well. Because if we do not, then we are not bringing out all those potentials which are related to the side of appreciation and the aesthetic side. When we become more conscious of the creation of Allah around the world, using the Quranic guidance, then we learn to see the world as a very friendly and conducive place where Deen will bring multiplied joys and peace. These two verses point to this fact that there is nothing which exists by chance or randomly in this world. Everything is planned to the minutest detail, including human emotions, desires, sentiments, thoughts, ideas. This should be a matter of great reassurance for Mu'mineen. Now, over here, I have taken out some pictures from Google just to make it slightly more colorful presentation. And the verse is, وَلَكُمْ فِيهَا جُمَالٌ هِينَ تُرِيهُونَ وَهِينَ تَسْرَحُونَ. And there we can see this is the sunrise and some animals in the forefront. Again, another view of the sunrise. And this is another beautiful view of sunrise. And this is another view of sunrise. And see how much attraction is there, which is created free for human beings. And of course, Allah created all these aesthetic and appreciative feelings within us. And this is the sunset, another picture of sunset. And this is another beautiful colors of sunset. And this is another free picture of sunset. Now let us go to the next verse, 16:7, a carefully thought out creation by Allah as Rabb. وَتَحْمِلُوا أَثْقَالَكُمْ إِلَى بَلَدٍ لَمْ تَكُونُوا بَالِغِيهِ إِلَّا بِشِقِّ الْأَنفُسِ إِنَّ رَبَّكُمْ لَرَءُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. Then see that these very animals which become the cause for the generation of such charming scenes do the job of carrying heavy loads for you. They carry your possessions to such far-off places that if you had to go there on foot, and together with this also had to carry this load, then this journey would have become a cause for great hardships for you. Just consider how much care and means for nourishment, for further growth, the system of Rububiyyat of your Allah, which is dispersed throughout the expanse of the universe, contains within it. There are signs in the utilization of animals for our benefits in life. Continuing from the previous two verses, here another important aspect is noted to remind us that Allah knew the issues of carrying, movement, and transportation, and this was carefully planned, and animals are placed at our disposal in order to manage the affairs of the world effectively. Despite the fact that in today's world, transportation means have been added through non-animal modes, these animals still help in remote, inaccessible areas, for example, in mountainous terrain. In the so-called underdeveloped world, these are still employed widely. This underdeveloped world is kept in that state by the rich countries in the world deliberately. I put down this comment just to remind ourselves continuously on a continuous basis that the kind of world we have created around us. Then we are reminded that when we make use of these animals, we need to be conscious of their creation and their role in transportation in the past and following the change in the means of transportation, their other uses. We should not just confine our thought to what is mentioned here. We need to relate it to the era in which we live. And of course, we have to take care of these animals as well and not to resort to any cruelty towards them. By mentioning three divine attributes here, Rabb, Rauf, and Rahim, the Quran has asked us to reflect deeply on the care and nourishment aspects of Rububiyyat. That is Rauf. Rauf means that extreme kind of care and affection which Allah has shown towards us, and we are supposed to manifest that attribute within our personality as well. This is something we need to recognize and perceive to be able to appreciate it fully. Acquiring these attributes within ourselves is part of the teaching of the Quran. Let us go to the next verse, 16:8. Transportation is part of the physical needs of man, and what is next in this transportation process, in this system of transportation in the world. Wal khayla wal begala wal hamira litarkabuha wa zinatan wa yakhluqu ma la ta'lamun. Then look at horses, mules, and donkeys. You also make use of them for riding and conveyance. And together with this, they are also a means of adornment for you, so that both utilitarian and aesthetic aspects become manifested. Apart from these, he also keeps creating many other things about which you do not yet have knowledge. And this is the beauty of this verse, that at that time, Quran had pointed out that there is a lot more to come which you will be able to create yourself. Because man is a creator. We are given those abilities to create and not to sit idle and do nothing. And particularly that is true of the ritual word of religion. So Quran has asked us to pay attention, and I'll come to some of these aspects in next slide. Movement, including traveling, is a sign of life. Continuing from previous verses, here the Quran has pointed to another aspect of these animals and their benefits for mankind in terms of going through the journey of life. Both physical needs and the aspect of human attraction for beauty and adornment is mentioned here. One important point to note is that all this drawing our attention to the other creation around us is with a view to highlighting human creation and its higher purpose in the grand scheme of Allah's creation. The whole focus is to invite man to convince himself of the importance of following the way of Allah with a view to making its guidance a part of his self. This should lead to the recognition that this life will get ever new meanings if he grows out of the animalistic state of existence. The mere fact that he can control all these animals to draw benefit from them points to the existence of his self-possessing choice and intent. This higher awareness should make him think at some stage of his life that the animalistic existence is not leading him anywhere in terms of being human. Unknowns need to be explored. By stating towards the end of the verse that وَيَخْلُقُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, and he has created something which do not know. That doesn't mean that we should just sit down over there and say that Allah has said that we don't know and therefore we shouldn't do anything. That is the wrong interpretation of this verse. And he has created that for which you do not have knowledge. Here we need to reflect a bit deeper in view of all the developments and progress made in the domain of transportation in the world. This inference is linked to the aspect of transport in the earlier part of the verse. When this verse was revealed, there was a tremendous storehouse of fossil fuels lying hidden under the surface of the planet, waiting to be discovered for later use as fuel for industrialization on a mass scale. This aspect also helps to understand such verses where the Quran states that you do not have knowledge. It does not mean you will never have this knowledge. So Quran is asking us to gain knowledge, and this thing will become discovered. This will become manifested. Instead, we need to view these verses, drawing our attention towards that which is needed to be discovered in such verses. In terms of all modern inventions, whatever man has managed to put together from the material available on the planet is through the use of those potentials which are required to invent and manufacture those things of conveniences. And despite all these verses, we have seen that in the intervening period for over 1,000 years, Muslims, despite reciting the Quran and going through it, failed to come to grips with these aspects. And it was non-Muslims who discovered oil and they created all industrialization in the world. Had Muslims not given up the path of the Quran, industrialization would have started long before recent times. One such aspect of a verse which should have been explored to its extremities is in Surah Al-Baqarah. Quran said, Allah said, Qala inni alamu ma la ta'lamun. If we remember, Malaika said that this man will create chaos and bloodshed in the world, and Allah in reply said, Qala inni alamu ma la ta'lamun. In response to Malaika, Allah said that what I know, you do not know. And this is what man was supposed to know, and Muslims were supposed to know and explore it. This means we need to keep researching what else Allah wishes us to know in the domains of physical life and also life at the level of the self. Now, over here, I put a schematic evolution of modes of transport just to add some color to my presentation. And this was the state in the past. Even now, in an underdeveloped world, we come across such scenes. And this is another one. And this is another one, particularly in relation to Indian subcontinent. And this is another one, transportation. And then it started evolving once man discovered fossil fuels. This is another one. And then steam also came into in view, and man started utilizing the force of steam. And this is another one. And then it becomes more modern and very modern. And of course, now man can carry things from one part of the globe in a matter of hours. And this Airbus, for example, A380, carries something like 800 people. And despite all modern technologies, man at a fundamental level remains the same. And that is important, that we should not get deceived by these technologies that somehow man at fundamental level has changed. His accountability still remains the same. The life of the hereafter remains the same. Quran's values are still applicable, and death is still a fact of life. Let us go to the last verse for today's presentation, 16:9. If nothing attracts you to reflect in the Quran despite these signs, then it is your choice. وَعَلَى اللَّهِ قَصْدُ السَّبِيلِ وَمِنْهَا جَائِرٌ وَلَوْ شَاءَ لَهَدَاكُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. You witness how all these animals keep following with eyes closed that path which they have been created to follow. Their traversing on the correct paths according to the demand of their instincts is solely in accordance with the law of guidance of Allah. Although other paths exist which go in another direction counter to their instincts, but they do not even glance at them. And that is an important aspect to which the Quran is asking us to reflect, pause and reflect, that these animals follow their instincts. For a donkey, for example, on a road, there are many roads which he can follow, but does not, because instinctively he will follow that which his master has asked him to follow. In the same way, if Allah had wished, he could have created you also to be like animals, and you would all have trodden one defined path. But he did not do this. He devised another method of guidance for you, and that was through wahi and risalat. And risalat means communication of that wahi to other human beings. Man needs to be more conscious of his own existence and importance in this earthly life. After having drawn our attention to a number of signs related to domestic animals and also other forms of animalistic life, the Quran now sums up the issue by stating that we should be able to pick up the fact that all receive direction from Allah. These animals are placed under our use and control as per His laws. And this is a carefully thought out plan so that man may utilize his creative potentials. Man is given choice and intent and has the tools of intellect and reasoning together with emotions to get the best out of his life only if he uses the guidance of the Quran. The point on which man needs to focus is to question why is he given this attribute of choice and intent. He needs to question this aspect that if his choice and intent is taken away, then what will happen, i.e., what kind of creation will he become? All these animals mentioned earlier do not have choice and intent, hence he can make use of them. Would he make an informed choice to be like them? The next point is, if despite having this choice and intent, he fails to appreciate its importance in his own self and in others, and that is important. I should not only be concerned about my own choices in life, but I should also look at the choices of others and what kind of an environment is influencing their choices. If I want more choices for myself in this world, then being human, I should also wish that others should have same level of choices, not that I should curtail their choices. And that is what is happening in man-made system. And lives life as if he has no choice and intent, and lives life as if it will end with death, then essentially he has taken a wrong path, and no wrong path in life can lead anyone towards the correct destination. This is an evidence-based fact of life. And this is something, this particular para is something which needs a lot of reflection from all of us, that have we included the choice of the hereafter in our choices or not? If we have not, and choice of the hereafter simply cannot be included in a man-device system, because man-device system is based on this assumption that the life ends with death. Once human beings die physically, there is nothing within them which can go beyond their physical death. Finally, do we have a good grasp of being human with choice and intent? Man with choice and intent becomes responsible for his own thoughts and deeds. And this is the beauty of it. It is not something which is a burden on us. And if we think that it is a burden on us, it is because of lack of teaching and lack of training, and not being fully conscious of these two attributes. Because we live in man-made world where these choices and intents have been curtailed by those who are in power. However, the issue before us in the human world is that, first of all, how much is an individual fully convinced of the presence of this ability to make choices? Secondly, what is the environment available to him in which to make choices? Thirdly, how much freedom does he enjoy to make his choice? Fourthly, is he aware of the values within which he is making his choice? And this is an important point to keep in mind, that what kind of values human beings have without the Quran. And all of those values will be relative values. And relative values are the creation of man-made systems. And what is its outcome in both the short and long term? Fifthly, how can he increase his choices? Or is he constrained by the society in which he lives to make his choices, etc., etc.? The next point which we need to come to terms with is that what is the state of this choice making within the man-made system? And how does this situation change under the system of Deen? For example, in a fully developed system of Deen, this will then help us to figure out the transitory stages of availability of these choices from the man-made system to the system of Deen, i.e., how much choice Allah wishes us to have in His world. At a fundamental level, the man-made system simply does not cater for the choice of the existence of the life of the hereafter. It is predicated on this firm assumption that human life ends with physical death, hence the case for accountability at the level of the self does not even arise. Now, here I've drawn a schematic which I will explain, and this essentially points to two choices in life. Sphere loss if choice of the hereafter is excluded. There are two concepts of life: the mechanistic concept, in which we assume there is only physical existence, and after death there is nothing within us which can survive our death. This is the only choice people have to live their life in 2023. Under this concept, the definition of success is to acquire as many material benefits as possible. And this includes, for example, wealth, possessions, spouse, children, job, status, power, fame, etc. This is all justified by creating beliefs which support this kind of thinking, because human beings can justify anything to themselves so that the guilt does not arise, so that they don't have to think about the problems they are creating for others. Religious beliefs are created to counter the fear of death. These are based on forgiveness related to an unjust concept of God, i.e., no human accountability. The interests of wider human community do not enter into this equation. This creates fear, grief, chaos, conflicts. And since this concept is based on this, that the life ends with death, life ends with physical death in this concept of life, just like animals. And literally, this is true. If we come to grips with the concepts which are explained in the Quran, we will see the evidence of it very clearly within our psyche. Man has no higher purpose of life. There is nothing in man which can transcend death. A transition takes place within this path when people come to the Quran. They start thinking differently. They are looking for guidance. They are not happy with the man-made system. And here the second concept comes in about life, exploring the higher meaning of life. Studying the Quran and the concept of Allah leading to the recognition of own self. And choice of the hereafter is created here. And then is widening the mental horizon through further study and observation of man-made systems, acquiring Iman in the Quranic value system, and through salih deeds, developing own self. Joining those who are on this path. And this joining those is consequence of a developed self, because then the desire emanates within us. It tells us that I want to be with those who are on this path. And this is not something which is imposed on us. This is the natural consequence of acquiring Iman and then doing salih deeds and developing ourselves. Concept of deen enters in this equation. And over here, what I've done is I have drawn a line around it, which was not drawn in the slides which were shared on our forum. We need to create this choice and then follow it. So this is something which we need to carry from this presentation of today. Thanks for your time and for sharing this today. Please feel free to share it with your contacts. You may like to subscribe for future talks related to the Quranic system of deen. Thank you.